Despite what you may think, the dynasty is not over. Sure, Alabama hasn't won a national championship since 2017. Yes, they did miss out on the college football playoff for the first time ever in 2019. But they are still led by the best coach in all of college football. And that might be enough to recapture the SEC West and get back to the playoff. Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, the best kept secret in all of college football. Kicking off the SEC today with our Alabama Crimson Tide college football predictions. As always, make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos, as well as check out everything down in the description below, where you can visit our official website, thegridironexpert.com, and gain access to our expert picks and our weekly newsletters, as well as follow us on all of our social media pages over on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So Alabama went 11-2 in 2019. That is a record that many across the country would consider a huge success, but not by Alabama standards. Not by Alabama standards, a team that had made the college football playoff every year since it began in 2014. Their only two losses came to the eventual national champions in LSU and against Auburn in the Iron Bowl. They capped off their season with a Citrus Bowl victory over Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. But the big storyline surrounding Alabama now is how will they deal with life after Tua Tagovailoa? And I think they're going to deal with it just fine. When you look at their offense, guys, they returned 7 starters. And Tua going down, yes, hurt Alabama's chances of making the playoff. I believe if he had stayed healthy across the board, maybe they still lose to LSU, but maybe they beat Auburn and then sneak in there as that 4th team in the playoff. Who knows? But him going down allowed Mac Jones to get some very valuable playing experience. Jones playing against Auburn. Jones playing against Michigan in their bowl game. And throwing for over 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions in those 4 starts last year. That's very solid playing experience against very solid opponents. So I think Mac Jones is going to surprise some people at the helm for Alabama. And luckily for him, he has a great supporting cast. Got Najee Harris, arguably the best running back in the SEC this year, rushing for over 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns in 2019. Yes, Alabama loses Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs, but they return their leading wide receiver in Devonta Smith, and they also return Jalen Waddle as well. Not to mention, Najee Harris is very lethal in the passing game. So Mac Jones has tons of weapons surrounding him. Maybe the offense statistically takes a minor step back, but productively, I really don't see that being the case. You look at their defense, guys, they returned 5. 5 from a unit that was in the top 20 nationally in 2019. And that's impressive considering how many injuries Alabama suffered last season. The biggest, of course, was Dylan Moses. Dylan Moses missing the entire season at linebacker. That was a huge blow to this Crimson Tide defense, and now he is back. Missed all of last season, but now he is back to lead this Crimson Tide defense, to lead this Crimson Tide linebacking core. You've got LeBrian Ray and DJ Dale back up front along that defensive line, and Patrick Surtain III leading the secondary, which is the only questionable position in Alabama's defense. And we know Saban, brilliant defensive mind at that, should be able to correct that as the season goes on. So how will they deal with life after Tua Tagovailoa? I think they'll be just fine. That's the storyline going around, but the bigger storyline you need to keep your eyes on is the fact that Alabama, for the first time in years, does not replace their coordinators. They return Steve Sarkisian as offensive coordinator and Pete Golding as their defensive coordinator. It's been the first time in a while that Alabama has been able to retain those coordinators, has not had to develop new schemes, and that could go a long way in Alabama trying to get back to the college football playoff. So we take a look at their schedule here, guys. They open up against USC. Certainly not a pushover game at all. Alabama defeated USC 52-6 in 2016 in this exact same location. The AdvoCare Classic, the kickoff classic down in Arlington. Now this is a game, though, guys, that really is going to challenge Alabama's secondary. We mentioned that's the only kind of questionable spot on this defense for Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide And they're going up against one of the best passing attacks in the country with Keaton Slovis and Graham Harrell's air raid offense with the Trojans. And he returns his top 2 wide receivers in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Vaughns. This is a USC team that had the 6th ranked passing offense in the country last year. So I expect this game in Arlington to be much closer than what we saw in 2016, that 46-point beatdown from the Crimson Tide. But ultimately, Alabama, angry after the way their season ended last year. Yeah, it ended with a bowl win, but not the bowl game and postseason destination that they wanted. They come out and take down a USC team that is going to have a few questions offensively despite returning 10. Clay Helton's fighting for his job. He gets close to winning this one, but not enough. Alabama 1-0, and a very, very tough test for their defense and certainly for Mac Jones as well. We haven't beaten Georgia State naturally. Didn't put it down as an automatic win because crazier things have happened at Tennessee. And then we've got Georgia on September 19th, guys. So they play back-to-back teams out of the state of Georgia. And, of course, the Bulldogs will be the biggest one. A game where the entire nation will be watching. Not just because this is a game between arguably the best team in the East and the best team in the West and could end up being the SEC championship game, but also because the past 2 meetings between Alabama and Georgia have been absolute thrillers, both resulting in Crimson Tide victories, but you have that 2017 national championship game, or 2018 national championship game, which was Tua's coming out party, and then, of course, you had the SEC title in 2018 as well, where Georgia just blew it. Very questionable fake punt call by Kirby Smart. Alabama wins that game in Atlanta and ultimately keeps Georgia out of the college football playoff. So Kirby Smart, since taking over at Georgia, is 0-2 against Alabama. Nick Saban is undefeated in his career against his former assistants. Can Georgia be the team and can Kirby Smart be the guy to end that streak? And we're saying no. We are saying no. This game is in Tuscaloosa at Bryant-Denny Stadium. I like Alabama taking down the Bulldogs here. Georgia's going to have one of the best defenses, maybe the best defense in the entire country. So they're going to have to get creative, Alabama is, offensively, to put up some points in this game. But the biggest question for Georgia is their offense. They only returned 2 starters, but we know they got an influx of transfers. Biggest is going to be Jamie Newman at quarterback, or maybe even JT Daniels. But whoever it is going to have a very, very difficult test. Arguably for Jamie Newman or JT Daniels, the toughest environment they maybe have ever played in. Newman never fared well in the big games at Wake Forest. Look at how he played against Clemson during his career. I don't think he's going to be able to come into Bryant-Denny Stadium and lead the Bulldogs to a victory over Alabama. If it was in Athens, I might be changing my mind. I might think differently. But we're leaning towards Alabama's way in what will be one of the best SEC games of the entire season. Alabama is 3-0. They take down Kent State. Dangerous dual threat quarterback there in Dustin Crum, but we believe that Alabama will get the job done. So then they go into SEC play, the bulk of it. Starting off with the road game at Ole Miss. And you look at this, guys, October is not favorable to Alabama because they play 3 of their 4 games on the road. Then after their bye week, they kick off November with another road game at LSU. So the schedule does not do them any favors really once they hit the month of October, but luckily their opponents in October are not that daunting. You start with Ole Miss. This is just going to be another fun one because this is another Saban versus his former assistant, and this former assistant happens to be the great Lane Kiffin. So Lane Kiffin rolls into Oxford. The Lane train rolls into Oxford, a team that put up 31 points against Alabama last year. They fell to the Crimson Tide 59-31. But we're still able to drop that many points against this Crimson Tide defense. And, of course, they were led by John Rice Plumlee, who put up some big yards against Alabama, who put up some big yards against LSU, but all on the ground. The key for Ole Miss this year is to find more balance, whether it's going to be Matt Corral or John Rice Plumlee, to get better through the air, and also their defense. How well does their defense play? I think some people have this as a trendy upset pick, that maybe Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin's going to get creative. He's going to maybe know a little bit about Saban that others don't. And being in Oxford, the Rebels can pull off the upset. I'm not seeing it. Right now, if any former assistant is going to take down Alabama, right now I believe it's going to be Kirby Smart. We don't have him doing it, at least in their first meeting. Ole Miss is not going to be the team to take him down. Alabama defeats the Rebels. And what could be a shootout, guys, what should be some great offensive fireworks in this one. But ultimately, I believe Alabama will have too much, and their defense will be the slight advantage in this one. On the road at Arkansas, a win for Alabama as well. Alabama defeating the Razorbacks 13 games in a row. This will make it 14 games in a row. Arkansas dropped 31 on Alabama back in 2018, but allowed 65. So while I think Sam Pittman works some magic, makes the Razorbacks much more competitive, and maybe finally wins a conference game, that conference game is not going to be against Alabama in Fayetteville. They then take on Mississippi State on October 17th, and we're going to give Alabama another win here. This is going to be another fantastic matchup, at least within the coaching minds, because you've got Nick Saban versus Mike Leach. And this game also holds a little bit of weight because this was the game that took Tua out for the season in 2019. Down in Starkville, Tua got hurt with that hip injury, left him out for the entire season, and ultimately, or the rest of the season, and ultimately kept Alabama out of the college football playoff. Ruined any chance they had of that. So, interesting matchup there. A little bit of revenge on Alabama's mind. You're looking at an Alabama defense that's going to have to try to shut down that air raid offense that Mike Leach is bringing into Starkville. But ultimately, their defense, kind of like Ole Miss here, isn't going to have enough. So while you could see some points scored in this one, Mississippi State and Mike Leach have their work cut out for them on the defensive side of the ball, and Leach has never been known to have strong defenses. So Mississippi State could go bowling, one of their 6 wins not coming against Alabama. And then a road game at Tennessee, guys. This is a trap game for Alabama, without a doubt. A major trap game for the Crimson Tide, a team that has defeated Tennessee 13 years in a row, just like Arkansas. 13 straight games they defeated the Volunteers. Last year, Tennessee was hanging with them. Before that fumble at the goal line, that Alabama returned 100 yards for a touchdown. Tennessee was in Bryant-Denny Stadium and giving them a decent fight. When you look at Tennessee this year, guys, they returned 9 starters offensively, 5 starters defensively. They have a very experienced offensive line. They have a great wide receiver core. They have a great running back core. The key for them is going to be getting better play out of Jarrett Garantano. That's going to be the key. How well does the quarterback play for the Volunteers? That's going to make or break if they win 7 games, or maybe they can win 9. Maybe they can upset Alabama in Knoxville. I just don't see it happening. I do not see it happening. Well, I do think Tennessee had a remarkable turnaround last year. While this is another game between Saban and a former assistant in Jeremy Pruitt, the Volunteers still have to step up defensively. Yes, they ranked 23rd in total defense last year, but I'm telling you, this Alabama offense is still going to be a force to be reckoned with. 13 years in a row, they make it 14 again. And just like that, Alabama still undefeated going into their Halloween bye week with the big game at LSU. This is another game, kind of like the Georgia game, that every eye in the country is going to be on November 7th, because this game could ultimately decide who wins the SEC West. We know that LSU had the greatest season perhaps in all of college football history last year, led by Joe Burrow and Ed Orgeron, and maybe the greatest offense we've ever seen as well. Records being set left and right, NFL talent being drafted left and right. But LSU loses so much of that talent in 2020. Joe Burrow is gone. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is gone. Justin Jefferson is gone. Thaddeus Moss is gone. Grant Delpit on defense. Christian Fulton on defense. All gone. So the key for LSU here is, how well does Miles Brennan play? How well does Miles Brennan play at quarterback, and how well does his offensive line hold up with only just 1 returning starter this year? That's going to be the key for LSU. Steve Ensminger is still back as offensive coordinator, so don't expect the offense to take too much of a step back, especially when they still have Terrence Marshall and Jamar Chase back at wide receiver. So we know LSU is going to take a step back. They're not going to go undefeated. We know they're going to take a little bit of a step back in every statistical category, but they're not going to take a step back when it comes to a win against Alabama. Yes, we have LSU defeating Alabama in Death Valley. That's a major reason here. This game in Death Valley, LSU coming off their bye week as well, per usual. In Death Valley, here's the thing. Under Ed Orgeron, guys, LSU has been a completely different team when they face off against Alabama. Les Miles snagged a few wins against the Crimson Tide here and there during his career, but Ed Orgeron has really shown that we're not afraid of Alabama. You know, forget them. Yeah, they've been the king for so long, but we can dethrone them. And they did that last year, defeating them 46-41, snapping their 8-game losing streak to Alabama. I think they start their own winning streak. 2 straight against the Crimson Tide here. It's a revenge game, sure. But I do think Alabama falls on the road in Death Valley. The offense is not going to take that big of a step back. Derek Stingley is going to wreak havoc in the secondary and make life very difficult for Mac Jones. And Alabama takes their first loss of the season on the road against LSU, which could be very costly depending on how the Tigers fare over the rest of 2020. A win against UT Martin, and then they take on Texas A&M and Auburn, both at home for Alabama. And that's going to be the key, guys. That's huge for them. You got Texas A&M here, a team that they defeated 47-28 last year. A&M's very good. Another classic Saban versus former assistant, Saban versus Jimbo Fisher now, and A&M returned 16 starters. The game was in College Station. I could see it being very, very close. And maybe A&M pulling off the upset, considering they could be 9-1 or 10-0 coming into this game on November 21st. The schedule is very favorable for the Aggies. But it's in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Alabama's hopes of an SEC title and playoff berth are not lost yet. They defeat Texas A&M, and in the Iron Bowl, they defeat Auburn. They lost to Auburn 48-45 last year. Keep in mind, though, that the result of that game, yes, came down to different scenarios and different key plays, but 2 of the biggest plays were 2 pick sixes thrown by Mac Jones. He doesn't throw those interceptions. Alabama probably wins. Alabama finally learns how to make a field goal, something they haven't been able to figure out in the past 5-6 years. They probably win that game against the Tigers. So, a Nick Saban team that is 5-1, Nick Saban 5-1 at home against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, I do not think falls in the season finale at Bryant-Denny Stadium. This is a major revenge game for them. Only 2 losses to LSU and Auburn. They go 1-1 in their revenge games, but probably the biggest going to be here in the Iron Bowl, because if they fall to LSU, they need this win to keep them in the SEC title hunt and the playoff hunt as well. So after all of that, we've got Alabama going 11-1 in 2020. Now, I know people will say that's kind of ridiculous, 11-1, Alabama's going to go undefeated, right? Not so fast, guys. Since 2010, Alabama has only had 2 regular seasons where they've gone undefeated, and that was in 2016 and 2018. This Alabama team is very, very good. Good enough that they can get back to the playoff. Good enough that they can win the SEC again. But they are going to slip up somewhere. I believe it is on the road to LSU. Maybe you believe it's against Tennessee, maybe even Georgia. But for now, I believe Death Valley will be arguably one of, if not the toughest game for Alabama in 2020. And we have them falling to Ed Ogeron, the Tigers, for the 2nd straight year in a row. But at 11-1, they are still in the hunt for all of the major goals that they missed out on in 2019. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. And also check out everything down in the description below, the official website, thegridironexpert.com, and our social media pages over on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.